aspects that we will be touching upon in today's session. We will try to explain what we usually mean by the term fiction, the different kinds of fictional genres that you are likely to encounter in your career as an aspiring publishing professional, what makes editing fiction different from other kinds of editing, the key issues to be kept in mind while editing fiction, the main questions that an editor of fiction has to address while he or she is at his or her task. So all the while we have to keep in mind the fact that there is no set rule for editing fiction, because editing fiction is a job that requires as much sensitivity, creativity and originality as the writing of fiction. So this is a basic fact that we will all have to keep in mind when we discuss any aspect of editing fiction or editing any other branch of creative writing. Slide please. Before we go into the specifics of editing fiction, we should take a look at those aspects of fictional writing that set it apart from other kinds of writing. Fiction, as we all know, is a type of creative writing. It is one of the forms of creative writing. So here, first of all, we will try to distinguish between creative writing and non-creative writing, and then look at the very creative role that the editor of a piece of creative writing has to undertake. So all the written texts that you will be encountering as a publishing professional, once you enter the field of publishing, once you are actually working as a publishing professional, all the written texts that you encounter are likely to fall within one or the other of two main broad categories: creative writing and non-creative writing. Of course, there are works which defy such classification and share attributes of both creative and non-creative writing. The creative writing program of IGNOU, you have a block called Fundamental Norms of Writing, and that particular block explains the basic distinctions between creative writing and non-creative writing. Thus, I quote, "The purpose of non-creative writing is to inform and broaden our knowledge. In order to achieve this purpose, the writer employs an analytical approach and presents his or her arguments methodically. Creative writing is almost a spiritual activity and involves the working of the imagination of the writer. The individual vision of the writer can be sensed in all his or her writing." I'm sure this definition, this explanation has clarified to you the fundamental differences between these two kinds of writing. As you must have noticed, the key words in explaining non-creative writing are information, knowledge, analytical, methodical, etc., while the key words in explaining creative writing are imaginative, vision, etc. So this is the fundamental difference between the two types of writing that you have to keep in mind. So creative writing differs from other kinds of writing in its techniques, in its methods, its approaches, its subject matter, and also on the intended effect that it has on the reader. Very often, creative writing is very subjective and intensely personal, and therefore it becomes very, very demanding, very challenging, difficult for anyone to edit the creative work of another mind. So having reminded ourselves of this basic fact, let us look at the key aspects, the specifics of editing fiction. Slide please. So what exactly do we mean by the term fiction? In common usage, when we say something is fictitious, we mean that it is something invented, something not real, not true. But what does the word fiction mean for the publishing scenario. Let us see first of all what fiction means for literary theory and what are the differences between literary fiction and popular fiction, what is commonly known as genre fiction. So these are some aspects that we will be looking at now. So as I just said, in common usage, fiction means anything that is invented, that is made up, that is not real. The literary critic M.H. Abrams has this definition of fiction, of literary fiction. He says that fiction is a literary narrative which is invented and not recounting events that actually happened. In a limited sense, fiction is used to denote the novel and short story. So as far as literature is concerned, as far as literary theory is concerned, fiction is a literary narrative that is based on invented events and not merely narrating events that have actually happened in the past. And as M.H. Abrams rightly points out, even in literature, the word fiction is used in a somewhat limited sense to mean only the novel and the short story instead of meaning a lot of other fictional narratives. It does not include a lot of other fictional narratives generally. So critical theorists have always been preoccupied with the nature of fictional texts and the kind of truth that they represent, but such discussions are mainly for critical theorists, and maybe we shouldn't go too much into such aspects right now. We should remind ourselves that these are debates that are concerned more with literary fiction. So now we have to look at again a fundamental distinction between literary fiction and popular fiction. Literary fiction would mean fiction that has a definite literary value. Popular fiction, on the other hand, stands for what is commonly called genre fiction, which is written to entertain rather than to satisfy any deep artistic impulses. So science fiction, detective fiction, horror fiction, crime fiction, young adult fiction, children's fiction, all these would fall under the category of popular fiction or what is called genre fiction. These are all different genres of popular fiction. Of course, we have to admit that this distinction again is not very clear cut. There could be a children's novel, for instance, which has a very lasting literary significance and literary value. Slide, please. Now we look at the different levels of editing involved in publishing fiction. We have already seen that fiction is an aspect of creative writing. We have seen that fiction is a kind of creative writing. We have seen that editing creative writing is very different from editing non-creative writing. We have looked at the meanings of the term fiction in common usage as well as the meanings in literary theory. We have seen that we have also realized that there is a basic fundamental difference between literary fiction and popular fiction. Now, from your study of your course materials, you must have come across the mention of different kinds of editors like acquisition editors, commissioning editors, literary agents, general editors, copy editors, etc. So when you talk about editing fiction, you are using the term in a very, as it is a blanket term that very often covers all these different types of editing. So you must have understood that a literary agents, by the way, are more common in American and European publishing houses. You must have understood that literary agents are people who actually liaise between publishers and writers, who help writers find the right kind of publishers, and they help publishers to decide whether a manuscript will actually sell or not. So they recommend to the publisher, they recommend the kind of manuscript that is likely to, that has the potential for success. So that is what you mean by a literary agent. Then when you coming to commissioning editors usually try to find out what kind of book would sell at a particular time. They sense the reading tastes of the reading public, and they decide what kind of book is likely to sell at a particular time, and they find the right people to write these books. They commission writers, authors to write these books. Once they decide what kind of book is best, is likely to sell at a particular point of time. So that is what you mean by commissioning editors. Again, you have acquisition editors. Acquisition editors examine the hundreds of manuscripts that come into the a publishing house at a particular point of time, and they decide which of these are worthy of publication, which of these should actually be published, and which of these are likely to sell. So in many ways, the acquisition editor acts as a surrogate reader. So the acquisition editor might be one of the earliest persons to see a manuscript, and he has to take this very crucial decision whether a manuscript should be printed or not, whether it should be published or not. So if you are, so now we've talked about literary agents, about commissioning editors, about acquisition editors. You also have another kind of editor called the general editor. So if you are a general editor, you would have to be an adept at multitasking. You would have to do a lot of jobs at the same time. The IGNOU course material on creative writing in English has a block on preparing a press copy, and this is how the general editor is defined. The role of the general editor is defined in this particular block. I quote, "The general editor may have to scout for the right authors and manuscripts." He may have to go around looking for right authors as well as right manuscripts. He may even think up and develop new ideas and get books or articles written on them. From among the manuscripts that pour in, he has to decide what fits best into his scheme or framework, what goes well with his readers, and then select accordingly. Thereafter, he has to go through the manuscripts and see what editorial changes are necessary. So I hope that gives you an idea of what the role of a general editor is. So now you see that you have literary agents, commissioning editors, acquisition editors, general editors, and of course you have the copy editor. A copy editor, as you know, is someone who has to ensure that he or she brings out a well-organized book, and has to do everything possible to ensure that. The copy editor has to look out for consistency in usage, proper punctuation, proper grammar, proper referencing, see that adequate footnotes, references, etc. are provided, and give proper instructions to the printer regarding layout, the right typeface to be used, etc. So in short, everything, as I said, that is required to create a well-organized book, that has to come from the copy editor. So if you enter the editing department of a publishing house that brings out fictional titles, you could be doing any one of these duties. You could be donning any one of these roles. You could be working as a literary agent, you could be an acquisition editor, you could be a commissioning editor, or you could be a copy editor, or even a general editor, or you might even be doing a lot of these tasks at one and the same time. So you may be responsible for editing a whole range of fictional genres, anything from classic fiction, say something from Cervantes, Don Quixote for instance, or you could be looking at a novel by Arundhati Roy, or you could be looking at editing the manuscript, the fresh manuscript of a young aspiring writer of crime fiction. So there is no end to the variety of jobs that are available to you as an editor of fiction in the modern publishing scenario. So I hope this section has given you an idea of what are the different kinds of roles that an editor of fiction is expected to perform in the publishing scenario today. Slide please. So all this while you will have to remember that editing fiction is a very creative act, and it is very different from editing, say, a reference manual or a thesaurus or a dictionary or even a journal article. Now let's look at some of the specifics of editing fiction. And the first, perhaps the most important aspect that should be kept in mind is the author-editor relationship, the relationship between an author and editor, which is a sacrosanct relationship in any publishing venture. It is crucial to maintain a cordial relationship between an author and an editor in publishing any kind of manuscript. This is particularly so in the case of publishing fiction, because here, as we mentioned earlier, you are publishing the work of, you are editing the work of another creative mind. So it's very important for the editor to first of all win over the confidence of the author. The editor has to give the author the impression that they are both working together to make a manuscript worthy of publication. That impression has to be conveyed to the author right at the beginning. So this is very, very crucial to win the confidence of the author. Except for very obvious and very glaring mistakes, no editor of fiction should make any serious corrections or serious alterations to the manuscript without duly consulting the author. This is again a very, very crucial aspect to be kept in mind while editing a piece of fiction. Since, as we all know, any serious creative writing is likely to be a form of self-expression by the writer. Any creative writing is an act of self-expression by the writer, and any good writer is likely to resent the fact that another person has tampered with his or her work without due consultations. So this fact also has to be kept in mind by the editor of fiction. It is not right, it is not proper for the editor to give the impression that he is imposing himself or herself on the author. The editor has to be very, very tactful and has to stay behind the scenes. He has to be as unobtrusive as possible. So in this connection, I would like to quote Mark Twain, who, as usual, has something very interesting to say about editors. It is not very complimentary to editors, but still worth remembering at this point of time. Can we go to the slide, please? Mark Twain once said, "I hate editors, for they make me abandon a lot of perfectly good English words." I hate editors, for they make me abandon a lot of perfectly good English words. What a typical thing for Mark Twain to say, and what strongly worded words he has expressed his disdain almost for editors. So this very, very characteristic utterance from an author who is known to make very forthright and blunt statements, it reminds us of the importance of maintaining a respectful and trustful relationship between author and editor. Otherwise, you would have a writer reacting like Mark Twain did. It also suggests that a writer is likely to resent, as I said, what he sees as unnecessary interventions from the side of the editor. So this is one of the basic aspects that one has to keep in mind while editing fiction or any other creative writing. Take the author into confidence, build up a relationship of confidence, trust, and a mutual respect with him. As we mentioned in this particular slide, the key words in this relationship are confidence, trust, and tact. And once this confidence is broken, it is very, very difficult for the author and editor to work together to produce a well-edited, creative piece of writing. Let's go to the next topic now. We will now look at the differences between technical editing and fictional editing. See how there are similarities between technical editing and fiction editing, and also how there are differences as well between the two kinds of editing. Are there differences, are there similarities in the approaches to technical manuscripts and fiction manuscripts, and are there any differences? The author Anne S. Jennings, in her article, in her paper, in her research paper, Editing Fiction, Do You Dare?, she points out that there are several points of similarity between fiction editing and technical editing. So Anne S. Jennings is someone who has several years of experience in editing technical manuscripts and is herself a teacher of technical editing in a university in the US. And she says how both technical editing and fiction editing are similar in many ways. They both look for consistent formatting, a very comprehensive approach to the subject, and the necessity for subject-wise expertise. You need to be an expert in your particular area. So whether you are an editor of a technical manuscript or a fictional manuscript, you need to have thorough knowledge of your particular area of work. You need to look at formatting, that is very important for both, and you need to have a very comprehensive approach to both to editing the manuscript. However, there are very, very fundamental differences as well. This is because people generally read technical documents for information. As we all know, nobody reads a technical document to be entertained or to get any sense of artistic satisfaction. The purpose of going to a technical document is to get some very reliable, solid information. So, and when you want information from a particular document, you go to that part of the document which you know will provide you with that information. So you could go, say, to the middle of a technical document to look for a particular kind of information. So the editor of a technical document has to keep this in mind. He or she has to provide adequate signposts. The editor of a technical document has to be good at signposting. You have to give very clear instructions to the reader as to where he or she can find a particular piece of information. But Anne S. Jennings points out, the reader of a fictional document, a fictional manuscript, is not likely to be be looking for information. He or she would be going at a linear pace. So you don't go straight away to the last chapter of a novel or short story. You know that the last chapter will resolve the entire conflict. So you like to proceed in a linear manner. You go chapter wise and not to the middle of the book or the end of a book at first. Therefore, the task of a fictional editor and the task of a technical editor are very, very different. The technical editor has to ensure that the reader of a technical document gets the kind of information he or she wants from a particular part of the document, while the reader of a fictional manuscript, the editor of a fictional manuscript is led more by the demands of fiction. So we will be coming to that next. So this, I hope, has clarified to you the basic differences between technical editing and editing of fictional manuscripts. The similarities as well as the differences between the two approaches, how you need very different perspectives, very different approaches, very different mindsets even while approaching the two kinds of manuscripts. Now we go to the next area. So suppose you become an editor of fiction in a contemporary publishing house. What are the skills and qualifications necessary for editing fiction? This is the topic that we will now be discussing. The skills and qualifications necessary for editing literary fiction, for editing genre fiction, the basic aspects of both literary and genre fiction. Are there common basic aspects that are shared by both these types of fiction? These are plot, theme, dialogue, setting, character, point of view, etc. and the editor's task in editing both these kinds of fiction. So this is what we will be addressing now, what we will be looking at now. So as I mentioned earlier, when you enter a publishing house as a publishing professional, as in the editing department, you may be asked to edit a whole range of works. It could be anything from a classic realist text to a postmodern text to a work of to a modern thriller. So how are you expected to equip yourself to do all this varied kind of editing? So suppose you are called upon to edit a piece of literary fiction, a very serious literary narrative. You would need to be well read in that particular branch of literature. You would also need to have a good idea of relevant literary conventions, excuse me, literary conventions, literary movements, excuse me, styles, theories, etc. if you want to take any meaningful editorial decisions. So suppose you are editing a piece of genre fiction. Again, you would need to be very, very well read. You would need to know all the conventions that a particular genre usually employs to create a particular effect. So this is very important for you to judge an author's success in creating a particular piece of work, and also for you to judge the pulse of the reading public. So unless you are yourself well read in that genre, you will not be able to judge the tastes of the reading public, and you will not be able to edit a particular text accordingly. So unless you are aware, you are updated in your reading yourself, it is impossible for you to judge the taste of the reading public and go about your editing tasks efficiently. So though there are these basic differences between editing literary fiction and editing popular fiction or genre fiction, though the kinds of qualifications and experience are that is required for both may vary considerably, there are some basic aspects that are common to both the editing of both literary fiction and non-literary fiction and genre fiction. And what are these? We could identify these basic differences as we mentioned in the slide please, plot, theme, dialogue, setting, character and point of view. These are some basic materials with which any author of fiction is likely to be working. So you have a plot, you have the basic story, whether it is a piece of literary fiction or whether it is a piece of genre fiction, you would have a plot, you would have a theme, you would have dialogue, you would have the characters speaking, you would have a setting, the time and place against which the action of the story actually happens. You would have the characters, the people who inhabit the fictional world, and you would have what is called point of view. What do you mean by point of view? That is the author's voice coming through. Sometimes you have the first person point of view, sometimes you have what is called the third person point of view, you could have a limited point of view. So these are all the basic materials that an author of fiction weaves together to create a particular effect. So as an editor, you would have to judge, evaluate a manuscript, to judge the author's skill in weaving together these different strands, these different threads. So in a very interesting article called Editing Fiction, Lee Masterson and Tina Morgan put forward some questions that could be useful starting points for an editor of fiction. I would like to put some of these questions, raise some of these questions before you. The first question that they ask is with regard to plot. Is there a clear, believable main plot? So imagine you are editing a piece of fiction and we are asking this question. Is there a clear, believable main plot? Is the plot credible? Can you believe it? Is the plot clearly resolved? Does the ending of the novel or short story resolve the plot? Is it brought to a good conclusion? Does the reader understand the sequence of events leading to the resolution? Does the plot move fast enough to grab the reader's attention? So the spacing of the plot is very, very crucial, because it depends very often on the kind of fiction that you are dealing with. Slide please. So does the pacing match the style and genre of the story? For instance, if it is a mystery novel, if it is an adventure story, it has to move at a very, very fast pace. So does the description of the setting take you into the fictional world of the author? Are the characters real or do they feel like stereotypes? Is the author establishing his characters unobtrusively? Are the characters consistent? Does the dialogue match the time frame? Are the characters talking on and on? This is something that can often happen in a novel. You have characters speaking on and on. This is something that does not actually happen in real life. Does each character have a unique manner of speaking? This is again very important to make the dialogue realistic, because in real life we all know that we all have unique manners of speaking. And do the characters in this particular piece of fiction have a unique manner of speaking? Is the point of view consistent? Is the author jumping about? Is the point of view shifting from one character to the other? And if so, is the author managing all those different points of view skillfully? Then you have to look for paragraphing. Are there too many pages without any dialogue? Because that can make it visually uninviting for the reader. If you have a page full of print and no white spaces in between, that very often puts off the reader. So that is something that the editor has to look for. You will also have to look for unintentional repetition. Do 2 chapters have the same theme, etc.? Is a character described more than once? Again, so these are the questions, some of the questions that are put forward in the article, Editing Fiction by Masterson and Morgan. Again, Anne Jennings points out how even at the copy editing level, it is very important for the editor of fiction to be watchful of certain things, because correct spelling is very important in technical editing, but maybe not so important in fictional editing, where in the dialogue of a particular character, a word may be deliberately misspelled. Similarly, proper construction of sentences is very important in a technical document, and an editor of a technical document has to ensure that, but it's not so very important in a fictional dialogue, where, because in real life we do not speak properly constructed sentences all the time. So these are some of the issues some of the questions that an editor of fiction would have to address while he or she is going about his or her task. Now we come to a very, very crucial issue, and this is the editor's role in checking for libel, plagiarism and copyright. So as in any other form of writing, issues related to libel and copyright have to be checked by the editor of fiction. The editor has to check if the manuscripts contains anything that is likely to offend the sensitivities of any particular linguistic group, any religious group or any minority group. In short, whether the text contains anything that could be considered as libel. Another very, very significant issue is the issue of copyright. The editor needs to check if the manuscript contains, whether it respects copyright rules and is not guilty of plagiarism. As you all probably know, this is an issue which is very much alive in the minds of the reading public today, after the recent incident, a very unfortunate incident in which a young aspiring writer was accused of plagiarizing huge chunks of material from the work of another best-selling author, and was forced to withdraw her work. There was an interview in The Hindu recently, which published many responses of some major publishers to this issue, because this is a very, very crucial issue in publishing, the issue of copyright. And let us see what some of them have to say. This is The Hindu, dated May 4th, 2006. Pramod Kapoor, of Chief Executive Officer of Rowley Books, has this to say: "Nobody can take any precaution against such a situation. We can imagine the source if an author lifts from a Vikram Seth novel or an Arundhati Roy book. But how do you check a not so popular original work?" So this probably gives you an idea of the difficulty of the task of an editor in checking for copyright. It is very difficult to take precautions against such plagiarism. If somebody plagiarizes from a well-known book, like say a Vikram Seth book or an Arundhati Roy book, it is easy to identify that, but not so when the plagiarism is from a not so well-known book. Again, you have another very significant remark by Vivek Ahuja, General Manager of Random House India, who says, "It is practically impossible for any publishing house to check each and every book and spot an act of plagiarism in a manuscript." So I hope that reminds you of the difficulty of your task while checking for copyright and libel in any fictional manuscript. So now I would like to conclude by bringing a few references before you, some books and articles which have helped me to prepare this presentation and which will probably help you too as well to acquire more information about editing fiction. These are works by Anne Jennings, Then a very significant title, Editors on Editing, What Writers Need to Know About What Editors Do, edited by Gerald Gross. Then you have Editing Fiction by Lee Masterson and Tina Morgan. I referred to this research paper in my presentation. Self-Editing by Laurie Handland. Editors on Editing, edited by H.Y.S. Prasad and brought out by National Book Trust, New Delhi. So, by way of conclusion, I would like to go to some of the main aspects that we covered in today's discussion. We talked about how fiction is an aspect, is one of the branches, many branches of creative writing. We talked about the differences in approach that we need to take up while editing fiction and editing non-fiction. We talked about the different genres of fiction that you are likely to come across in modern publishing, the differences between literary fiction and what is called popular fiction, the various genres of popular fiction, how there are basic differences and similarities between technical editing and editing of fiction. We talked about the basic aspects shared by all kinds of fictional writing, whether genre fiction or literary fiction. We also looked at some of the issues, some of the questions that an editor of fiction would like to raise while looking at a particular manuscript, while evaluating a piece of writing. And we also discussed two very crucial aspects, copyright and libel, which are very, very important aspects of publishing today. I hope this discussion has been useful in helping you to decide whether you would yourself like to be an editor of fiction one day. Thank you very much.